While Egypt and Libya are two of the countries that have cut diplomatic ties with Qatar, CGTN's Yasser Hakim takes a look at their differences and common ground with Qatar and their fighting stance on fighting terrorism.
Egypt's relations with Qatar reached breaking point when Doha refused to recognize the 2013 uprising and harbored leaders of the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood. The two countries are on the same side in the war in Yemen, but Egypt accuses Qatar of funding and arming terrorist groups in Syria and Iraq. Egypt also believes Prince Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani is supporting extremist groups in neighboring Libya. Cairo says they crossed the border to attack its army in Sinai and target Coptic Christians. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi made it clear that action is needed.
There's no room to divide the crackdown on separate fronts. In order to succeed in eradicating terrorism, we need to face all the threats on all fronts at the same time. Unfortunately, there are countries that support, fund and provide safe havens for extremists, and there are states that refuse to share information about terrorist groups and militants, even with Interpol.
The latest boycott suggests the president may have been referring to Qatar. The political row is also reflected in economic relations.
Bilateral trade is extremely low. At its peak, it was $1 billion. Now it's down to $300 million, even less. The number of Egyptian workers in Qatar is not as high as in other Arab countries. And Qatari investments are minimal, mainly hotels in the tourism industry and unfinished real estate projects.
Libya is a more complicated situation. There are two opposing governments with two armies leading the country. One is an Egypt ally in the east, led by Khalifa Haftar and the National Assembly. The other is an Islamist pro-Qatar government in the west, led by Faiz al-Sarraj and his presidential council. Sarraj and Haftar's forces have clashed several times and have taken opposing sides on almost all issues. But Libya has been preoccupied by infighting and the crackdown on ISIL. Along with Egypt, it has been unable to convince other Gulf nations to establish an Arab League military force.
The idea of a joint force was not on the table when I joined the Arab League 11 months ago. It had been frozen, but as I understand from the proposal document, the mission of such a force was not specifically to counter terrorism. In principle, it was intended to support and strengthen the military capabilities of Arab nations to counter any national security threats, including terrorism.
While they may have opposing views on other issues in the region, Egypt and Libya share common ground on Qatar. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.